Hello everyone, my name is Daniel Backer and welcome to Off the Wall Novels. Today I'm going to talk about the book that I just finished 30 minutes ago, Berlin, Alexanderplatz by Alfred Döblin. My co-host Pringle is in his cage, several inches out of frame. He might make an appearance at some point, but this is a great book. Probably the best book that I've read this year. Definitely the best work of fiction that I've read this year. I've been on a German literature kick since reading and adoring Faust last October. And this was just another excellent installment that's probably going to make it up on my shelf. I'll do a video about my corner shelf at some point of all my favorite books that have really inspired me as a reader and a writer. But it's considered like the masterpiece of the Weimar era. And so I also thought it was really cool that this captures a nation that doesn't exist anymore. And I think it can be said of most old books that they capture just a world that doesn't exist anymore. But literally, according to like legal history, the Weimar Republic is gone. And so it did feel like a time capsule of an era and a part of the world that I don't really know a lot about, but I've been trying to learn a lot more about that in the past year. And I'm also trying to plan a big trip to Germany, hopefully by next summer, if I can save up enough money. But it was a really good read, and it's told in this stream of consciousness style that was refreshingly simple, because other stream of consciousness stuff that I've read, like The Waves by Virginia Woolf, and I loved that book, by the way. I thought it was amazing, and it really pushed me as a reader and a thinker, but I did find myself questioning, like, why is this 300 pages? It was so difficult to understand what was going on a sentence-to-sentence level that I had to reread the paragraphs a lot, and I think it was worth the work. But sometimes when something is so experimental like that, I'm just like, why is it this long then? Because it wasn't very plot driven either. Whereas this, stream of consciousness, but it's really easy to understand what's going on in each paragraph. And then it's also got a really nice plot to it. Like there is this sense of finality at the end. And I'm going to spoil the end here at the end of this video, but I'll give you a warning beforehand because I don't think you should let this book be spoiled for you. It's not just like, oh, the style that they're going for. The last thing I'll kind of say about that style is that a book like Nightwood by Juna Barnes, I think is like the perfect book because it's very experimental and stream of consciousness and dense, but then it's also short. So it gives you a lot to chew on, but then it doesn't feel like work every time you come back to it. And sometimes that's how I feel, even with a book I'm really digging. I come back to it with a little less excitement every time that I read it, even if it's blowing me away. Because at the end of the day, reading, especially reading literature, is work. You know, and hopefully the book is good enough that that work feels worth it. And that's definitely what I feel about this one. So the plot, if you don't know, follows Franz Bieberkorp, who is fresh out of prison. And I won't spoil why he was in prison because that is something that comes up, but it is pretty early on in the book. But when he's released from prison, he is just kind of thrown out into Berlin and all of the chaos and the hustle bustle around him, which the stream of consciousness style really captures very well. But he is determined to be on the straight and narrow path. And a lot of his story is interspiced with these different biblical retellings that kind of connect his circumstance to different passages from the Bible. I will say a lot of them I was not familiar with the original Bible story, and so I'm sure I would have had a richer understanding of it if I had known. But a lot of these connections and retellings of those Bible stories and connections to like ancient Greece in certain parts are pretty short, and it doesn't feel like I missed things about his story in not completely understanding every reference. And with this one too, I was determined not really to take notes. I didn't want to be like on every page putting it down to go look up what was going on because I've just realized recently that in doing this channel, sometimes I turn reading into work, and I really wanted to enjoy this book. And maybe I'm just making an excuse because I didn't want to do the background research. But all of that is to say the connections to those Bible stories becomes a lot more important toward the end. And I'll kind of talk more about that once I get to the spoiler section of this video. But the plot ends up being these like tests for Franz, that he's trying to be a more moral person and like get a good job and not basically engage with sex workers anymore like he used to. But as you can imagine, things don't really go that way. And little by little, he tries to get out, but it pulls him back in. And that's just like a classic kind of like noir setup. I don't think this is a noir, but it did feel like that because the element of crime ends up becoming pretty important in the book. And a lot of the cast of characters are introduced very fluidly, and little by little, he's just kind of sucked back in. And one of these, this might be a light spoiler, but it does happen like kind of in the first half or in the middle of the book. So, you know, click away if you don't want anything like that. But he gets tricked into going on this kind of like theft operation, this job where they're going to sneak into this building, and he kind of figures out that he's supposed to be the watchman while they're on the job. Like he gets tricked by this guy named Reinhold, who becomes very important in the story. And he has like major regrets that he just feels like his fate has brought him back into the criminal underworld. And so he ends up getting pushed out of the car during their getaway from this job, and the car behind them, I think it's either the car he's in or the car behind him, runs over his arm, and he has to get his arm removed. And that's this enormous moment of loss for him, where the consequences of him getting sucked back into the criminal underworld are made very material. And that ends up being super important throughout the rest of the book. But I kind of want to get into the spoilers now so I can keep this video kind of short. So definitely click away if you don't want any of this spoiled for you. But even like 3/4 of the way into the book, I had kind of thought I knew what the book was doing. That it was just going to kind of follow him, and then he'd probably get thrown back in jail and end up back where he began. And that does happen. But what I did not expect is how trippy it would get at the end. Like he starts to lose his mind, and a lot of the like imagery of the Bible stuff becomes like real in the actual story, where there's descriptions of like the whore of Babylon coming with 7 heads and like kind of taunting him while he's in bed. And a lot of people who are dead start to basically rise up and speak to him very casually, as if this is just something that happens every day. And then it sort of personifies the wind as something that's like beating against him, and it has a lot of agency, the wind. And it's sort of like goading him toward this spiritual death that he needs to go through in order to actually become redeemed for all of his transgressions and wrongdoings. And then likewise, there are these birds that start flying around and like twittering and saying these like prophetic things to him. And he leaves his body at one point and talks to like field mice, and he's like able to burrow into different holes and stuff. And like, I just did not expect that at all, because even though it's a stream of consciousness book, most of what it is for like nearly 300 pages just takes place in baseline reality. Like they do get into those biblical stories, but I initially just interpreted them as just these references. Like, oh yeah, like this is his circumstance is kind of like that circumstance in the Bible or the book of Job. But then it all kind of smashes together in a really exciting way. And if I could criticize anything about the book, it's like I just wish more of the book had been like that. It's not a big knock against it, because this is, again, probably the best book that I've read this year. But the last 70 pages or so get really, really trippy, and he does appear to be redeemed. And it's given me some cool ideas for how to wrap up the Kingdom of Liminal Space, which is the book that I'm working on right now, because I definitely don't want to spoil too much about that, but it's about a guy who has an entity that's channeled into his brain through a modular synthesizer. And just the idea of having different entities being able to move between different bodies is an image that I've always been really drawn to in fiction. I think the best I've ever seen it done is in a book called Radiant Terminus, which is on my corner shelf. I'll do a video about my corner shelf at some point that has, all my favorite and most inspiring books on it. But that's a big deal in Antoine Volodine and his output of spirits not really being locally bound to individual bodies, and that they can, I think it's called metempsychosis, that they can leave their bodies and then inhabit the body of an animal. And for a book written in the 20s, I didn't expect it to get that psychedelic. And so I just love that kind of imagery. I thought it was really, really cool. And so it has given me some amazing ideas for how to wrap up that book. And then, I think that's all I want to say about this. I want to keep this one short and sweet. I highly recommend it. I get why it has the renown that it does. I've heard that there is an adaptation of it in a TV series that's very faithful to the book. I am a little hesitant to watch it, because sometimes when I really love a book, I just don't even want to spoil the way that it sits in my mind. That's probably why I'll never watch The Age of Innocence, even though I think it's probably an amazing movie, just with the cast and with Scorsese and everything. But that is one of my favorite books of all time, and I don't want to disturb the way that I think of it. So I'll end with a shameless plug. If you guys want to support me in any way, Lionel Lancet and the Right Vibe is the novel I put out just about 3 years ago now. And The Kingdom of Liminal Space, my novel and concept album, will be released on Christmas. If all goes well, I have been kind of toying with the idea I might push the release date back just a little bit to ensure that I deliver the highest quality product. But this has been Daniel Backer. This is Off the Wall Novels. Thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.